Well, my name's Renée Zettle-Sterling. I teach at Grand Valley State University, which is outside of Grand Rapids, Michigan. I have for years been working with casting and combining it with fabrication in my own work. But being a teacher, I noticed that I teach sculpture and metals, but in my intermediate metalsmithing class, I introduced them to traditional lost wax casting. And I noticed that, when they graduate, they don't have a centrifuge or a vacuum. And so it's, they're at a disservice, or a disadvantage, I should say. So it was really important to me to introduce something to them where they could make a form and continue casting in a way without having to be bound to those to that equipment. So I started to introduce them to some of the things I was teaching my sculpture class in terms of like making a two-part mold, casting plastic, and casting some other alternative materials. I'm going to show you some examples of some of these alternative materials, but I'm really only going to cast plastic today. But mainly I want to show you how to make a two-part rubber mold or a two-part plaster mold, and what you can cast into those. I do typically, this is typically a 1 or 2 day workshop, so I'm trying to like fit it into a really short amount of time. So what we're going to do is we're going to make one of these, and this is really rough. I mean, I have students that really take pride in making a two-part mold, and so this is a plaster mold, and this is called the model, or some people call it the matrix. It's the object that you want to make a mold of so that you can make multiples. And I love this. I've had this around forever because it reminds me of the Holy Spirit. I grew up Catholic, so it's like, oh, I think about it when I see this. And I've never really done anything with it, but I love it. You can tell here, too, that the object is not simple. So in terms of selecting a model, like this object has a bit of an undercut, okay? So it has the space that if it was in the mold, I wouldn't be able to pull it out. So what I did was I went in and I filled that with plasticine, which is an oil-based clay. It never, dries out or sets up, and so, it's a great material. But so this horse seems like it's rather complex, right? I mean, how would you just make a simple two-part mold of this horse? This horse looks like it would be a three-part mold, like the mold material under the legs and on the side and over here. But actually, if you look, a lot of these things are stamped with like made in China, and they also have the parting line. So it's hard to see, but actually this was made in a two-part mold. And I'll pass that around where you can see the parting lines. But I'm always looking for objects to see if I can make a mold out of them. And once I have the material, after I make the mold and I have it in wax or even plastic, especially wax, I can modify it, I can put texture on it, I can add to it, and then I can cast it traditionally. So it's a really, I think, a really good skill set to have to be able to make a two-part mold. But I'm always keeping my eye on kind of simple objects or toys or things of that nature that I can change. And I think also something happens conceptually when you cast something, you kind of remove it from itself by one, and I think that that's also something really interesting in terms of casting. But first I want to get started on, so this is, I kind of went ahead and started on this. So what I did was a couple years ago we had Mariko Kuzumoto come to Grand Valley and do a workshop, and she sent me this little birdie whistle, and I know that it's hollow, but maybe I want to make it solid, or maybe I want to cast this in metal or in plastic. So what I have to do with my object then is that I have to put it into the plasticine halfway. So I have to know my halfway marks. So if you look at, do you see how it's in the plasticine halfway? I did this ahead of time because this takes time. And you can use, I use these toys of my son's. Oh my God, I think I'm scarring him for life because I'm constantly like taking his stuffed animals and ripping them apart. And I'm like constantly stealing his toys, but this was like a dinosaur that he had and he could model the whole thing. But these are great. So I use these. And so what I do is I build up, do you see how kind of nubby and nasty it is down here, which is fine. It has a lot of rubber on it. But I'm just kind of building up this platform behind the object. And then eventually, and I know it looks a little rough, but I had to use this yesterday. But then I'm going through and I'm really smoothing and articulating that seam line, because if that isn't perfect and if it's really messed up and not smooth against the object, then you have what's called flashing. And anybody that does casting is pretty familiar with flashing. But you can get that in this process too. So I need to go around and really clean that up and articulate that. But like I should spend about another hour on this and then it would be ready to go, but I don't, it's a demo, so you know, we're imagining, right? So using our imaginations on that. But this is really bad because I had to rip the mold from yesterday off, so I could start fresh. So also just kind of the anatomy of making a mold, you'll see that there's marbles here, and these marbles act as keys. And so this mold needs to be able to be locked together. Okay, so you have to have keys, all right? And marbles are a great way of making those keys. You could even carve the keys out of the plasticine itself. And also right here is the pour spout into the mold. And so you want to be really careful about where you position this. Like I don't want to put it where there's texture. Or I don't want to put it to the thinnest area of the model. So I felt like this right here would feed the wax in through here, and then it would feed the wax in through here. I can also later carve in auxiliary channels for the material that I'm casting into to move through this. Sometimes when you make a mold, it doesn't always work out. And so you have to modify your mold. And sometimes in plaster you can file or rasp it away, or you can, with the rubber, you can use your X-Acto knife and cut it away. Or maybe you find that you keep getting a pocket of air, and then you can just make scribe marks. And then the air, when you're pouring the wax or the plastic in, the air has a place to go. So, but again, this is really rough. So that is pretty much the way to get started. And then you need some kind of mold frame. Oh, back to this. You can also use for this pour spout dowel rods, wax. You know, it can be really any material to make that. I'm going to show you one image where somebody used a battery. So it's, you know, whatever to make that channel. So, all right, so that's pretty much set up. And then, so now I need some kind of mold frame. This is what I've been using, and that's just aluminum flashing duct taped. And at school, we have huge pieces of this to small pieces, depending on what the students are using. And so that can be what holds that material in here. Or we also have, these are called, and these are kind of dirty, but these are called coddles, or mold frames. And this is melamine, and then this is a piece of pine. And so the way that this works, and I've done this forever and I still always have to think about this. It works like this. So what's great about a mold frame is I can modify, you know what, hold on. I can modify this to, and we have huge ones too in the studio. So if I'm casting something long, I can make it long. If I'm casting something really, you know, small, I can do that. Okay. Also, I haven't done this to my son yet, but when he's tired of his Legos, you can make your mold frame out of Legos. So, but I've done enough damage to him, and he's only 8. Okay. So these are great, and they're very easy to make. So the melamine's just cut to whatever size, and then the pine's just nailed into it. So, all right. But with this one, I'm going to go with the aluminum flashing. So be careful when you work with this. You can get cut really bad. And it's important, and I'm shy right over here. I could have a little bit more space, but again, it's a demo. But you want about a ½ inch to an inch the whole way around the object. It just gives you more room to move. And so now what I have to do is I can't pour my rubber in here yet. I have to use the plasticine and make it into little wormies. And you want to, and I'm not going to work in here, okay? Because I can cut my hand and it's just too deep. So I'll work out here and attempt to get the plasticine bonding to the aluminum and to itself. Yesterday I had a huge leak, so hopefully that doesn't happen. So I'm just sealing it, yeah. And you know, just take your time with this. And the plasticine that I brought is a really hard plasticine. Oh God, it drives me crazy. But at school it's no big deal because we have a big convection oven that you can put your plasticine in and warm it up. So I've been warming it up in the microwave here on popcorn setting. So, and it works fine. So, and that microwave's not really powerful, so it's been sufficient, but you would probably have to experiment at home. You can put it in your oven, but you want to make sure you're not baking this. You're just warming it so that it's pliable. So, but you could even buy softer plasticine. You know, it's just what I'm left with here. So, but when I was in graduate school, I used to make molds. I didn't know what I was doing. Nobody was teaching me anything. And well, I shouldn't say that. That's terrible to say about where I went to school. I don't mean that. I mean, oh God, I hope nobody that I went to school with or taught me heard that. But basically, I was, you know, you're kind of in graduate school. It's very independent. So I was just making molds out of cardboard boxes, and that was like my mold frame. So. I'm sorry, I always feel like my head's in the way too, this working under this thing. Okay, it's not? Okay. Okay. It's starting to get really stiff right now, so I know I have a little spot down here. But like I said, if this was, you know, normally what I would be doing if I was making this for a piece, or if I was coaching a student on this, it would be a lot nicer than this. But we only have an hour and a half. So, okay, very short amount of time. All right, so let's just pray I don't have a leak. So now I'm all ready to go, but the biggest thing, and most people forget, is that you need a mold release. So today I'm using Polytech products. Polytech is a company in Pennsylvania, and there's also another company called Smooth On that sells mold making materials. There's probably companies on the West Coast as well. It's funny, but Smooth On and Polytech live down, they're both on the same street, so which is very strange. I don't know how that works. So, but I always use Polytech. Some people like Smooth On. So what I'm using, I'm using the mold release that's formulated for the rubber that I'm using. And the great thing about Polytech and Smooth On is they have great customer service, so you can call them and be like, oh, I'm using this, what do I use as a mold release? Or they're very good about that. Also, they have a lot of YouTube videos that you can watch on their products. But this is Poly-Ease 2300. And what I'm doing is I'm just lightly misting the bird. So if you take a look at the bird now, and you should do this in a ventilated area, but I'm living on the edge. So notice that slight gloss that it has now. I'm not like, you know, I'm just lightly misting it. I don't want it oozing out. Oh my God, I see a huge hole. Okay. So I'm like.
Is that better than green soap?
Yes. Yeah, this is great. And you can use it on silicone, and you can use it, we pretty much use it for everything.
No bubble?
No bubbles. All right. Okay, so I'm ready. And also my marbles are sunk halfway in, by the way, too. The bigger that you work with this, the bigger your keys should be. Okay, that's kind of common sense. All right, so now I want to mix my mold materials. I want to work back on this because I'm really worried about like screwing it up for other people. So, So I'm using, and because I couldn't bring the whole quart, or actually 2 gallons, I just broke it down because I didn't want to pay shipping on all that. But I'm using Polytech's Poly 7430, which is an RTV liquid rubber. It's a polyurethane rubber. And so Polytech and other companies have different formulas of the same kind of series of rubber, and some being harder, some being softer or stiffer. So, and this seems to work really well. That's what this is. This is Hello Kitty in there. And that's what this is. So you could see that it has a stiffness to it that's kind of nice. It's just enough to like pull your wax out or your piece of plastic. So. And this being the same. You notice that even though these are the same rubbers, they have a slightly different color. And that's because Polytech and probably other companies too, they have a winter mixture and they have like a summer mixture. And so, so in the winter it's darker, so they must be adding something to it in order to be able to ship it so it's not freezing. So also notice how I have this labeled, like A has all the like crazy marks on it and B is kind of quieter. Normally I would spray paint this. It is very important that A lid goes back on A container and B lid goes back on B. Now B is, this is very viscous, part A. B is very, it's not as viscous. So it's, you got to stir it up or shake it. So it's really important, and it'll say right on the container when you buy it. When you start working with the chemicals, you want to start wearing gloves. And this doesn't give off really any fumes, but I mean, I think it's always good to have like a fan or something going to kind of pull that away from you. It's probably giving something off, we're just not noticing it. Or maybe I'm so used to it that I don't notice it. All right, so you can also, I also have handouts, but please email me and I'll give you my email. It's just, I didn't want to print out 80 handouts, so sorry, I was being cheap. And I'd be happy to give you all this information on Polytech, on, like, okay, if I make a plaster mold, what can I pour into a plaster mold? If I make a rubber mold, what can I pour into a rubber mold? What's my mold release? And I have all that outlined. So for instance, you can make a plaster mold, but you can't pour plastic into a plaster mold. Okay? You can only pour plastic into like a silicone or a rubber mold, a polyurethane mold. I just wouldn't be able to get it out. So things that you can pour into a plaster mold are wax, but your mold has to soak in water for a while. That's the lubricant is the water. You can pour false face material. This is animatronics rubber. Notice all the flashing. And into a dry mold, into a dry plaster mold. So there's different things. This is fishing worm rubber. That goes into a wet plaster mold, and I'll hand all those out to you. All right, so basically, I go through a company called Creative Wholesale, and I buy these graduated cups, and they're really nice. Before this, I used to just use drinking cups, and I would mark it, and then I'd like sit it there. Or you could do it by weight too, if you have a scale. So what I'm going to do is, here's the other thing. Well, how much rubber do I need for this, right? There's probably mathematical formulas. I had a physics student take one of my workshops before and she figured it out. I'm like, I have absolutely no clue. I'm not kidding. When I'm thinking math, my mind just goes blank. So you can fill this, before you spray the mold release, fill it with rice. And then that'll give you an understanding of volume. Then you dump the rice out, then you can spray the mold release. There is air in between the rice, but it gives you an estimation of how much you're going to need. I also didn't bring rice, so I'm going to eyeball it. So, and if I overestimate, it's okay, because then it's less I have to pay in shipping home, right? On this material.
50-50?
Yes, it's 50-50, and that's why I also like using this. I'm at 2 ounces right now. I'm going to go 3. So imagine if the rice is at 6 ounces, right? Okay, you would overestimate because there's space in the rice, but you would do 3 basically in part A and 3 in part B. Everything I'm showing you is 2 equal parts today. I cannot stand adding a catalyst and a drop of that, and like my mind just like shuts down immediately. I know I sound like a really lazy person, but sometimes I am. So for the most part, I'm not. So, okay, look how much thicker this is. All right. So it's okay if I am I even on there? Yeah. It's okay if I pour this by a little bit because some of it's going to stay in the cup. You're going to try your best to get it out. But the instructions are, oh my God, come on. It's like watching a snail. Okay. I'm almost there. Okay. Yeah. Oh, I'm right on. Okay. Where'd my lid? Oh, here's my lid. All right. So notice one's really viscous, one's not. So the rule is always to pour the thin into the thick into the thin, and the reason is if I poured the thin into the thick, it just kind of hangs on the bottom. This way you're forcing it not to just sit on the bottom. So what I want to do is pour that in there. I'm in no rush here. This takes, I cannot demold this until tomorrow at this time. Okay. Yeah, so you have some working time. It will start to get tacky and thicken up, though, in a couple hours, where, you can't take that long. But right now we're working, just to kind of reiterate this, we're working on part 1 of the 2-part mold, okay? And then I'm going to show you how to make part 2 in plaster, but pretend it's plastic, or whatever you want to pretend it is.
When you go to clean up your cups, do you have to use a certain type of salt?
Yes, this cleans up with paint thinner or mineral spirits, but I'm terrible. I'll just throw this away. I know it's Seattle and the West Coast, and we're very primitive on the East Coast in terms of recycling. So, yeah. I know. Well, God, I go to the garbage. It's like I don't know what I'm doing, what I'm throwing where. It's like, when I visited Japan, I didn't even know how to use the toilet because there was too many instructions. You didn't know where to press to flush, and it's like here I stand at the garbage, like what? So. So that's true. Okay, so I'm ready to start stirring this now. And I can bring my mold over here. All right. And I've definitely estimated a good amount, I could tell.
How spendy is this stuff?
How what?
Spendy. Cost, how much?
Okay, well, it's petroleum based, so it fluctuates like gas. So it can go anywhere from, I've bought a quart and a quart, so you have 2 quarts, for $45, now it's around $70. So it just moves all over. I think last year, yeah, it did, because then, because I've taught this workshop 3 or 4, this is my 4th time this year teaching it. At the beginning of the year, it was 55. So, and now it's gone back up. So it's really interesting. Yeah. All right. Now, the reason for your mold not setting up are a couple reasons. One is that you didn't use equal amounts. 2 is you didn't stir it enough. One time we had a mold, I had a student who bought feeder mice, they were already dead, and we took a mold of them, but they started to leach their juices, and that mold didn't set up. So it was a learning experience for both of us. It was really, yeah, this is RTV, so it's a room temperature vulcanized rubber. So unlike the vulcanized rubber where you have to put it in the vulcanizer and heat it up, and then you don't have to do this with this. It sets up at room temperature. So
you could get ones that cure very quickly in your mice if you were so inclined.
Yeah, that was such a learning experience. I'm like, oh my God, it was so gross too.
There's a grad student in Florida that got busted for doing live rats.
Oh my God.
Animal food.
Yeah, I went to school with a girl who was actually driving along the road and picking up roadkill and then inking it and then printing it. I was like, her studio always smelled really bad. So it was,
We can do tossing back.
Yeah, I'm like, oh. So I've been stirring it for, it feels like 2 minutes. I usually stir this for 2 or 3 minutes, and then you can see at the bottom if it's still really yellow or light, because the part A is very light. So it looks really consistent.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I can pour it. And you can pour directly on the model. Also, this degasses itself. So you'll notice in some of these molds that there's bubbles on the surface, but there won't be bubbles against what you're taking a mold of. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So now the way that I dispose of this, not recycling, is that I actually try to take my gloves and wrap it around it before I throw it in the garbage. That way it's just not like, giving off all those fumes. So do you guys smell anything? So yeah, it's pretty. There we go. Yay, my mold's holding. So there we go. But if, do you see this mold here? I don't know if you could tell, but there's like bubbles right in here. So the bubbles will rise to the surface on their own. So, but I usually give it a little tap. But you can see them rising right now. Okay. All right. I don't have a garbage can. Okay. I don't even know what Seattle will do with that, so it's like, like where it will go. Okay, so that would be one side of a 2-part mold, and I'll pass it around. This mold has gotten a lot of use. You can see it's a little bit abused. I let my students use all my stuff too, which is probably a bad idea. But what I would do is if I wanted to pour, I'll get into pouring the plastic in a minute. But I'll pass this around if you guys want to take a look at that. So now I would, when I open the mold, I would have something that looks like this, right? Like after this sets up and I take the plasticine off, I take my sidewalls off, I'm going to have something that looks like this. So now I have to do the other side of this, all right?
How do you cut that in half? With a
So
knife?
I don't cut it in half because I've done just one part now.
That's right.
So, yep. All right, so I don't have to worry about any of that. But I'm going to jump to making a plaster mold, okay? But it's the same thing, it's just a different material now. So here we have this little thing given piece. It's sitting down like this. All right, so I have a slight hole, but I think it'll be fine. Yeah, I got a little leak. I'm going to put it here. Hopefully it doesn't leak too bad. Okay. So, all right. Now I'm going to use the cottles. And again, I have to think about this. All right. So there we go. So I've done the one part. I have my pour area, I have my marble holes, or my keys, and now I have to use clamps. Or you can use those squeezy, but I have carpal tunnel or tendonitis or something, so I can't use those. I usually have to have assistance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 2 sides of this, and then, and these have been through a lot, so you see it's bowing out. But I'll bring it back in, okay? And this mold's been around forever. I don't even think I made it with a coddle. I can't even remember. All right, now I have to get back with the plasticine, and I have to seal all along here and up these walls. All right, so now you have to bear with me. All right. Can you heat my plasticine again? Damn, plasticine. Okay. And then I'm going to show you something after this that makes all of this kind of like boring and who cares. So that when I do this workshop, everybody's like, I don't want to do that. That's too much work. I'd rather just do this. I'm going to show you a silicone mold putty that's 2 equal parts that everybody gravitates towards instead because it sets up in a couple minutes. So,
What's
and
the plaster that you're using just for
I'm using, normal plaster of Paris. So, and again, I'm not going to do a great job here because I'm on the clock, but it's definitely important to seal around that mold.
From Ceramic Supply House, you can get mold makers plaster as far as
Really?
plaster.
I'll have to write that down.
Put 50/50 mold maker with silica, you can do that in glass.
Really?
Yeah.
We have, we just started glass slumping at school, but I don't know much about it. All right, but again, this is like super basic. This is like barely scratching the surface of mold making. I had a student who made this incredible mold of a pair of scissors for me, and he took so much pride in it. Like, see how gunky this is along here? He actually sat there and filed that down and made it beautiful and sanded it, and then he poured the other side. So I can modify this right now before I even pour the other side. But it was really, it was just so beautiful, but it's huge. But I always take it to my workshop so I can show you like what it means to take pride in that. He actually ended up getting a job working as a mold maker, like in a foundry. So it was just incredible. All right. But for me, this is just a way to get a form, you know, that I'm going to alter or that's going to go through a lot of more changes. Okay, other side. That should be good. I feel like so hot. Are you guys hot? Like, I am like sweating my butt off. I feel like my ears are inflamed. I'm like,
Yeah, that too, yeah.
I'm like,
Look at that one.
it's just like, okay, thank you. It's incredibly hot up here. So, or maybe I'm just nervous. So, all right, I'm gonna pass this around too. This is a 1-part mold, so not every mold has to be, you know, or we call that, you can call it an open face mold. And that was a barrette.
If you do a 1-part mold fast, I found that you just push your model right into water-based clay, like ceramic clay.
You just pour it, yeah, you can take a mold, yeah.
Doesn't work with the plastic.
Yeah. Do you see what he's saying? That you can just take normal clay and press your object into it and take an impression and then pour the wax right into it. Also, to make the bed of starting to make your 1-part mold, you can use normal clay. You don't have to have plasticine, but plasticine's nice, you know. But,
Water-based clay is nice.
so, yeah, I hate, you know, there's certain types of dirt that I can accept and deal with, and clay's not one of them. So I can't stand clay on my hands, or like I like metal dirt, or you know, there's certain dirts that I'm all right with, but clay, I just can't do it. So, so I have this bias against clay because I don't like the dirt. So okay. So that's pretty decent. I mean, it's not great, but it'll do. So now I'm going to mix the plaster. And depending on how you were taught, I usually talk to the students about, you know, with plaster, you always have your water first and you sift the plaster in. But I always compare it to like investment. I was taught opposite of that. I was taught to start with the powder and add the water. Other people are not taught that way, but so there's always more than one way to get to the end result.
Use the same spray you use?
No, I'm going to use Vaseline, yeah. So I'm just going to put some on the brush, and you can overdo it here too, and I will show you what that should look like.
If that was the urethane, would you be using plasticine? I mean, using the Vaseline?
No, I use 2300,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah. You know, and then Murphy's oil soap is a great mold release too with plaster. But the thing with Vaseline is you have to be really careful that you're not losing some kind of texture or part of your object. So it's really important to make sure that you're, you know, really smoothing that away. The other thing about the plaster is that it exotherms, so that means it gives off heat. And I think through that process it also kind of levels out the Vaseline. Okay, so I have some water here, and okay, this goes back to my math. I just estimate. So some people, you can figure out the formula for this, but you know, I live on the edge, and I'm not like this, you know, perfectionist. So okay, and I brought my plaster in a bag, so I would have it. And you always, and this plaster's been through a lot. My students, they don't listen, and so they leave the bag and the box of plaster open, and then it gets all lumpy, which drives me insane. So, but you know, hey, the Grand Valley gave it to me, I'm using it. But you can see it's a little lumpy. But I don't want to just dump all this in. So with plaster, you have to sift it. You know what else is great to use with plaster in terms of making a mold of something, if you have like an open face mold, is pulp. So I've made a lot of molds just to press pulp into it. Now you can't pour pulp into a mold, so you can't use it with a 2-part mold. And we're getting actually a pulp sprayer, so that'll be really nice where I can spray the pulp into the mold. The great thing about paper is it's really durable, and it's also really lightweight, so you can make larger pieces. So once the plaster starts to, anybody have any questions so far? Okay, once the plaster starts to sit on the surface, you know you're ready to start mixing it. So.
You were saying about emailing you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I have a little thing with my email on it, slide thing. I also have some cards too. So. It's funny, it's like plaster will pretty much double or triple what your water is. So it's really... do you see how it's starting to just sit on the surface a little bit more? It's taking a little bit longer to absorb. See how it's sitting there? So I want to try to get along the edges.
You don't bother sifting it?
Yes, I would, yeah, but I'm here and I hit this, yeah. Yeah, I would sift this, like with a sifter, so. But it also, if you're really just kind of patient and you try to sprinkle this around evenly, it works pretty well. Try again.
Go to school.
I got an undergraduate degree in fibers and paper making, which is, I don't know what you do with that. And then okay, so I'm ready, you see that? And then I have MFA in sculpture installation, and I have an MA in metalsmithing. But Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania is where I have my master's, and Indiana University of Pennsylvania is where I have my undergraduate degree, so I'm a product of the state system. Yeah. So, which is a good state system. I miss Pennsylvania. I'd rather live there than Michigan.
You don't mind plaster, but you don't like clay.
Yeah. So, okay, so now I'm going to pour it into my mold. Okay.
Don't bother brushing out
If I was working bigger, yeah, but I'm working so small that I just pour it on, and I've noticed that it still has good results. He's saying that you can brush a layer on first and then pour layer on. Some people do that with rubber molds too, where they'll do a layer first and then pour it on. But it's so small. We're working really tiny, so I'm taking something that's normally done large, like in sculpture or ceramics, and I'm making it really tiny. And I'll just try to break the surface tension here. And
Bubbles can come out.
yeah, and then I just let it sit. So I'm going to actually put this on the floor. Okay. All right, so that is, and then when you're done with a plaster mold, sometimes you can't find your parting line. Sometimes you can't find your parting line, so it might take some rasping, a little bit of work. But what I do is I'll take a chisel, and you can see the little mark here, and I'll start to, on both sides, lightly open it up. You don't want to just jam it and try to pull it this way, because you'll pull all that information out and you break it off. So you want to open it a little here, open it a little here, open it a little here, and then slowly pull it apart. Otherwise you run the risk of,
Even with the Vaseline?
Yeah. You'll run the risk of it basically breaking off information. So, all right, so that's really just a really general gist of making a two-part mold. So. It doesn't have to be highly, it doesn't have to be overly complicated. You're still getting a form. So the next thing I want to show you is how to cast the plastic into the polyurethane mold. Oh no, I want to show you this first, sorry. That will just change everything and nobody will care about what I just showed them. So, okay. So this is a silicone putty. This is a 1 pound kit. It mixes 2 parts and it's called Easy Mold, or I've seen it called Amazing Mold Putty. You can buy it at a craft store. We have Hobby Lobby in our town, but Michael's, or I don't know what craft stores you have, but typically you can buy it. So the great thing about this is you don't need a mold release. So I need to find an object that I can take a mold of. So just, you can also make this into a 2-part mold. Silicone also comes in liquid form, that you mix it together and you do exactly what I just did in the polyurethane. The advantages of silicone are they're food grade, so if you want to make chocolate necklaces or chocolate bracelets, or you want to make ice jewelry, you would use this. So this is food grade. It can also withstand being in the oven at like a certain temperature. So people that work with Fimo and what's that other one called? Fimo? Sculpey can use this big time. I've also seen it on YouTube where they're actually rolling it into sheets like this so that they can then use this to add texture to their Sculpey or their Fimo. So, so this is really an amazing material. So I'm just going to, and sometimes it's not always about like getting the entire object. This is my son had a kitchen. I took his grapes and I know, I'm terrible. And I just wanted a little impression of the grape. And then I cast the plastic into it. Okay, so this is really lightweight, it's beautiful. I can saw it with my jeweler's saw, I can sand it, I can drill into it. You definitely want to wear a mask at this point. It is so bad to breathe this in, I can't tell you. But you know, maybe I just want a moment, and then I could tab set this, or, and I'll show you some examples of my student work. This is, I did yesterday, or the other couple workshops ago, I had this little, where's my model? This is my model. Okay, a little ducky, and then yesterday I poured this. All right, so I'll pass this around. And when I say it doesn't need a mold release, what I mean by that is that it doesn't need a mold release when you're pressing it over an object initially. I also want to show you, so here I have this grape, cluster of grapes. I took a mold of it, okay. I've made it in plastic, but I can also then cast it traditionally, and this is a sprue tree. So I can cast it in traditionally then. I can just pour wax into this, okay? And then this was one time I did this in hydrogel, a bigger cluster of it, but you don't have to see that. Also, when I'm pouring the, making the molds, this is another example. I got this on Etsy. It's a cluster of gems. And so I made a mold of it. Okay, and then I cast the plastic into it. And then if I want to, I can cast it traditionally, and this is white bronze. So you can see it's sprued. I'm an over-spruer, so if you look at this, I over-sprue everything. So, okay. I've also had organic material. I always have people at workshops that are like, oh, I want to do something like a twig or organic. You have to seal that first. So this was like some kind of, somebody helped, pod, yeah, that was my friend found in a Asian food market, and this is one side of it. So we had to seal that first with like a clear acrylic, a wax, shellac, yeah, something. This was a part of a plastic sculpture, the head of David. So, which is cool. Imagine this as a brooch. I mean, there's so many possibilities here. Oh, hold on. And then this was a barrette. I like to wrap my do you see how it's kind of like I'm pulling it out? It's a little bit of work. I like that it locks it in place like that. So, but and then here's the plastic. Also, you can make a 2-part mold. So inside of here is a little teddy bear, and basically we're going back to the vulcanized process of when we used to have to, and people still do, cut with a surgical knife, open that up, and then you could take out your object. But you're doing the same thing here, but I'm not cutting the whole way through. Okay. I can also do this with the polyurethane. They make a clear polyurethane so you can see your object inside. I could pour it into a tube and then cut it out. the traditional way. And if you cut slightly crooked, you're cutting your keys into it. But I'll just put a little rubber band around this, take my X-Acto knife and clean this opening up, and I can pour really anything into here now.
And so if you were working with precious metals like silver or gold, you would maybe make a wax model? Then
Yes,
out
yeah.
using cement metal?
Yep. And I've actually had students make little tiny people using this process that I'm showing you. And then we put a little washer here, and then we actually inject it and using the wax injector. Some of this that I'm passing around, these keys are in bad shape, but this is sculpture wax, which is way softer than and a lot less brittle. But some people don't like it because it leaves prints, things like that. I also, well, first let's take a mold of something. So what you do is you mix 2 equal parts. You want to make sure you're not cross-contaminating. I have my students use spoons in each one, but I'll just use my 2 fingers. And then I have to figure out I'm going to take the face of this. I hate clowns, so I don't even know why I have that. So I want to try to get equal parts, and I want to figure out how much, I'm going to need, like how much, I have seen some people overestimate the amount that they need. So it doesn't have to be really thick if you notice the things I'm passing around. So you want to try to get 2 balls that are in similar size. This is pretty close. Anil. Yeah, you could. So there you go. Now, the reason that this would not set up is that, 1, I don't have equal amounts or close to it, or I haven't kneaded it together enough. And if it looks like it's all spirally inside, then you know that you haven't kneaded it together enough. I mean, there's really no rush, but there is. I mean, this will start to set up in about 10 minutes, and then I can use it immediately. So, but I think if you're going to be pouring plastic into this or wax, I would not then use it to pour chocolate into. Like if you really want to use this for food, set that aside. So it looks really well. Yeah, it's pretty good. All right. So some people like to actually press their object into it, and some people like to form it over this way. But I like to form it this way so that I can get that little lump around it that holds things into place. And then I also like to flatten it on the bottom so that when I'm pouring something into it, it's not all over the place. The problem with taking a moment of something like this, I just took a moment of it, not the entire thing, is that when I'm pouring whatever material into it, it's going to want to pour back out. So I'll use plasticine and make a little dam or something, or tape, or or prop it in a certain way. But I use this a lot. This is one material that I use a lot. Sometimes you do get air bubbles in it. Like right there, I just didn't take my time kind of for getting the piece in there and just pressing and trying to work out the air bubbles. And that was from yesterday's demo, that's why. Okay, so I'm going to let that sit there, and then we'll come back to it and demold it.
How long does it?
Like 10 minutes, and I can start to use it. It's really nice. So, okay, so now for casting plastic, I'm giving you a lot of information here. Okay, casting plastic. This is a Polytech material too. It's called Easy Flow 60. And there's colorant that you can buy at a craft store. This is used for resin. It's hard to see the label. I think it's called casters. But it's a opaque dye. It's not a transparent dye, okay? Because with resin, the transparency is important, but this is opaque. So, but I'm not going to dye this because I really want you to see what happens chemically whenever this starts to set up. This, you're on the clock. I've had this set up in mid-pour. The problem with using this is resin takes so long to set up that it kind of debubbles a little bit, or you can speed it along with a hot gun or a blow dryer and kind of work the bubbles out, or put it in a pressure vacuum. But this sets up so quickly that it's very porous. So if I was to cut one of those plastic pieces open, it's pretty porous. How am I on time? When am I done? 1? Okay. Okay. All right. So casting this. They also make little graduated cups too, which are quite nice. I'm not being as wasteful here. Oh my God, I taught this workshop at California University of Pennsylvania this year, and this girl's like, my God, you changed my life. I'm like, whoa. But I started feeling bad because the students were so consumed with this process and the materials, I started thinking about recycling and plastic, and I'm just making more plastic. So it was just like, I was like, I never realized until they were so like interested in this that they just went crazy. Okay, let me see. I'm going to pour, there's something else I want to talk to you about with that. I'll pour this, and I will pour this little, again, I'm like bothering my son. He has this little thing of cookies, I don't know why. I took a mold of it, the mold, and then here's the plastic. It's black, it's hard to see, okay? So maybe we'll just pour into this or into this. Now, it's important now to use mold release. Even though the plastic will pop out of the silicone, the mold release is pretty important because it just extends the life of your mold. So I think if you're ever in question, just use mold release, you know, if you can't think about it. I want to send around an example of too much mold release. Let me hit this too. I always have extra things that I can cast just around. So do you see this Hello Kitty? It's kind of gunky right here. That's too much mold release. Do you see that I over poured the mold? That doesn't matter. I can take my X-Acto knife, and right when I cast it, it's kind of soft after I pull it out of the mold. It's so easy to trim up. I can file it, I can sand it. So this is a really, I always keep that around to show you too much mold. And then this is resin in a silicone mold. Most molds for resin are made of polyethylene. So you'll see that when you're pouring resin into something that's not a polyethylene mold, it gets a frostiness to it that I've been able to buff out using just normal buffing wheel in the metals room.
If that was resin, what was the blue piece that you said?
That's plastic. That's what we're going to go over. But remember, I'm not adding colorant to this, so I just want you to watch what happens because this material exotherms big time. Anybody familiar with skin wax? It's like a therapeutic wax that you can dip your hand in. Well, Polytech sells 5 pounds of it minimum, and then basically, like I'm not showing you any of my work today, but you can go on my website. But anything that has like my body part or anything like that, I'm using skin wax where I'm dipping my body part into it. And then I'm dipping it up layers. It is so hot, it exotherms so bad that it's melted the whole wax apart. So I figured that I could suspend it in water and then that would kind of counteract it, and it worked. But it really does give off heat. And I should be wearing gloves, but I'm just gonna not wear gloves and hope I'm fine. Okay, for right now. I seriously, don't ever listen to my safety advice. So it's like, do as I say, not as I do. That's like my motto. So, all right, so part A, part B, just make sure you're getting the lids back on. They have the same viscosity, but if you are adding color, you're adding it to part B, which is on, if you buy this, it'll tell you that on the container.
What was this called again?
This is Easy Flow 60. And it sets up, it is a very quick setting plastic. It's also not a plastic that's meant to be worked hollow. So this stuff is supposed to cast solid because it cures from the inside out. So if it was hollow, you'll notice if I get little pieces of thin drips here and there of it, that'll take way longer to set up than if I poured something solid. And the bigger it is, the more heat it gives off, the more energy it's producing. So it's very interesting. So I have 2 equal parts. I'm going to use a bigger cup to mix it in. And I'm also and there's no limit to the amount that you can mix. You can mix a really small amount with this, okay? So once I start this is it. I have to go to town. Like I can't mess around. So it's also not persnickety like resin is, I think, persnickety. Like you got to stir it in this cup for 1 minute and then put it in the other cup. And so basically I know when I'm ready to pour because it'll start to give off heat. So, yeah, you can feel it right through the cup. You can feel it big time. This gives off as much heat as plaster. It's really interesting. I can feel it starting to get warm. And they say it's about 1 minute of stirring.
What's the difference between this plastic and resin? Resin's also 2 parts, no?
It is, but there's polyester resin and then there's epoxy resin, so there's different types of resin. This is more like a 2-part epoxy. It's very similar to an epoxy resin, where the polyester resin you have to add the catalyst depending on how deep the thing is that you're casting. So, all right, so I'm ready. It's giving off heat. If this was a workshop, everybody could feel it, but it's not. So I'm pouring it right in the mold. I'm not concerned with whether or not it's, oh, I over poured. That'll peel off though. so easily amused. Okay, okay. And then, you know what? I like having baby bottle nipples around. And I'll show you why. Because I love this shape, and I also love the shape of those rubber, these things.
Rubber fingers.
Yeah. I turn them inside out, and then I cast into them, and I get this. And I'll pass it around. Now, this cup is usable, because once this sets up, I'll just peel out the plastic and use it again. These 2 cups, however, are not, unless I label this, unless I'm doing a lot of casting and I label it A and B, and then I keep using it. Okay? So I'm going to just let that set up. Now, the thing that's going to set up the quickest is going to be this piece here, because it's deep and it's wide. It's the biggest thing that we have. So keep an eye on it, because you'll see it start to set up from the inside out.
The yellow mold, I know what the purple mold is, that's the...
It's the same material. Yeah, it's just a different brand. That's called Amazing Mold Putty. So, but it's still silicone putty. Yeah. Okay, so while that sets up, I'll talk to you a little bit about, you know, some other things. One, I put mold release on this, and I poured on this and gotten this beautiful thing in plastic, which I thought would be really cool to cut out discs and then set them like stones. So, yes, watch. Pow. Also, if you're doing color, when you add the color and you're looking at the color and it's all liquidy, it's going to lighten significantly. So, but do you see how this hasn't even started? Yeah, or that stuff down here. So, oh, this is what the inside of a nipple looks like. A baby bottle nipple. So, also, I've been pouring it into ice cubes. You know those novelty ice cube trays? Yeah. Really cool to pour this into. And it's really a lot of fun. So that's what...
Candy molds work?
Candy molds are awesome. My pin swaps are this year. So, but I over poured because I wanted them to be big, and then I prong set them. I didn't prong set them, I tabbed them. So
Damage the
not at all, but it damages like the wax, the skin wax. So now, as for this, it's starting to get solid, but it's not quite ready. You can feel that it's not as hard as the pieces that got passed around. The great thing about this plastic too is I did a tube setting, or a tube rivet, and then I drilled into it, so it's really cool. I've sandblasted it, which is kind of interesting. I've had students just really play around with it. I want to pass this around. This is really weird stuff. I'm not showing you how to cast it, but it's cast into a wet plaster mold. And this is fishing worm rubber, and I get it from Lorecraft. It cannot be worn, because anybody that's sitting up here, look at the oil slick it left. This is more of a sculptural material. Also, if I don't like this, I can melt it back down. So it comes 1 part, and it's just the heat is a catalyst. You heat it over about, I think it's 300 degrees, 250 to 300, but it gives off terrible fumes. But this is what fishing lures are made out of. So avid fishermen can add scent to it. They can add a lot more glitter. It's really interesting. I've had these things for years, and they're still fine. But again, you just can't use it. I want to show you too, like, you can see it's really going. I feel really bad when I have extra plastic. So I've been pouring it in the bottom of just drinking cups, and then I suspend these vintage shells in them. And then this one is an example of just a brooch. This is not my normal work, but it's just I feel bad. Here's this set into just a quick little pin. And then this is resin. This is my son's finger and my finger. So someday he's going to like just be so embarrassed by me. Okay, if he's not already. So this is, I was telling you about the animatronics rubber. Notice the flashing on this, but that can easily be cut off. This is hollow, so this is a pure rubber. This is pure latex, and it's very ammonia-y. But you pour it into a dry plaster mold, and the dry plaster mold, it's like casting porcelain. It wicks the moisture out of it, and so this is used in the industry to do animatronics. But it's a really cool material, and these have been around forever too. I just can't store these with the other rubbers. Everything has plasticizers in it, so you want to store things separately from one another. This is the mold, and I got impatient during a demo and I took it out, but this is the mold that my student made, and I wanted to make these scissors that were very flesh-like. And so I had a pair that actually turned out. So but this was my thing that didn't turn out. So
The hollow pieces you have there, you just pour it in and
then you dump it out after like a couple minutes, depending on the thickness that you want. Yeah, it's really interesting. That's resin in skin wax. So you can pour resin into the skin wax too.
Those latex pieces you also pour in and pour out?
Yep. Or no, the latex, yes, you pour in, then you pour out. Yep. Also, another material that's great for an open face mold is pulp. And you can get already pre-made pulp at Twin Rockers, but they also sell sheets of pulp. It's like, it looks like blotters for like printmaking. It's just paper that hasn't gone the whole way. And so you can soak it and put it in a blender and macerate it, and then you can press it into a mold and use a sponge to wick out the moisture. Twin Rockers paper making company. Also, good drawing paper is really great.
The banana.
Yep, the abaca. Yeah. And so this is pressed into a mold, and I just, again, I painted it and then I set it with a pen back just to see it's so light. What that looks like. Sorry about how dirty these are getting. They just have been everywhere. This is that same seed pod, but it has flocking on it. So this is a material by Dawn Jur, and they basically, you can buy a little flocking kit, and you know that suede that's on the inside of jewelry boxes and on bobblehead dolls? That's what this is. And so you fill up this tube and you like pump all the suede onto this, and it comes with an adhesive. So. Also, I've been pressing pulp on anybody that likes stamping. I've been pressing pulp into stamps, and this is beautiful. I mean, it picks up everything. I'll show you that. And I'll pass these around. I've also been pressing pulp into the silicone mold, and that's what I've gotten. So, and some of these, if it looks fuzzy, it has flocking on it. Also, you can email me with any questions. I want to get a t-shirt that says "Flock Off." That would be so cool. So, with flocking. So okay, so this is ready to demold, and so here you can see the little guy, and I'll pass that around too. Now, if this is no longer giving off heat, I can demold this. Even up here, look at this. It's still kind of transparent. It's not quite ready. Like, this is so gooey. It's like taffy right now. Okay, which some students like to demold early, and then they manipulate it, and they'll bend it around. But there we go. It's a kazoo. It was a kazoo. So, and I don't want to demold this yet, but I think you get the point. Okay. I do want to show you some images, and I think I'm going to do that now. Oh, if you do use a candy mold, put mold release on it. I made the mistake one time of the skull candy mold, and I didn't put mold release on it, and I used this. I didn't have mold release, and I could never get the skulls out. I was really disappointed, although I got enough out to use them in a piece. But I want to show you some. I just gave you like the most insane amount of information in the shortest amount of time. So. I want to show you some images now, because I teach a lot of workshops, but I don't ever get to see the outcome of the workshops, if anybody's even interested in what I'm talking about. So it's really nice that I can force my students to do these things. And okay, so anybody that hasn't worked with plaster, this is starting to set up. So it's getting there, but it's going to be a couple hours before I can demold. So I want to stress this again too. The work that I'm showing you is from intermediate jewelry. They've had one jewelry class prior to this. And so in my classes, I try to balance concept with technique. So like I said, I'm showing them the traditional metalsmithing techniques, but I'm also introducing them to this. This was from this semester. They had to do an assignment based on repetition. So I spent a lot of time doing PowerPoints and trying to introduce them to, conceptually, like, what does repetition mean? Where do we see repetition? So we see it in advertising, we see it in science, biology, we see it in nature, we see repetition everywhere. So I want them to think a little bit more about that. So this was, she actually carved a ring and then she cast it. The deal was they had to cast 1 or 2 parts in metal and then the rest in plastic. And they had to have 10 or more parts. And so she's actually sandblasting them. So you can see that they're not as shiny. But this piece was very wearable, very kind of couture. And then here, these are dental, yeah, not mouth, they're dentures. And so she's using the skin wax that is being passed around, the latex. She's using that, excuse me, but she's painting it on plexiglass, and then baby powder is the release. It's the thing is that latex will stick to itself. So you have to put baby powder in it before you take it out of anything. So she's just putting baby powder on it so it doesn't stick to itself, and then she's sewing it between the teeth. So it's kind of an interesting image. These are Swedish fish, but they're actually made out of fishing worm rubber. So she was taking the molds of the Swedish fish and then taking molds of them. You can see she's doing traditional casting and wax working with the structure that's holding the grass and the gravel and the fish. I also asked them in one assignment to, a lot of them want to go into jewelry, but I don't even think they understand what jewelry is or what it means or the impact that it has. And we've been adorning ourselves since the beginning of time, and why. So I have them look at that draw that we've had in all cultures to adorn ourselves. So Nikki, she was a exchange student from London. She actually was interested in foot binding. So with skin wax, she was dipping her hand in the skin wax and then cutting it out and actually casting the skin wax. So that's how she got that form. But these all have hinges and locks that lock around the hands and bind the hands. This is all bronze. This is really the limit of size that we can do. We have a mini melt furnace, and so we can't really cast any bigger than this. We were at our capacity for each half of the hands. I also asked them to think about how objects stimulate memory, and so this was based on a prom. But the inside of the petal, or of the flower, the stamen is plastic, and then she was drilling into it. This was all, she modeled the vertebrae out of plasticine and then took a mold of it, and then she was pouring plastic into the mold, and then between the vertebrae she was casting aluminum, and it's all magnetic. And so this really talks about her relationship with her mother. They both suffer from a spinal disorder. So Scott was interested in how we base children's jewelry off of adult jewelry. So you could see the adult ring on the top, and then all the kind of proliferations? I'm like not saying it right, but yes, thank you, of that one object. So, and you can see that the plastic has a kind of a matte-ness to it. He was sandblasting it too. This is Nikki again. So she's using hydrogel, which I think we're all familiar. Most of us are familiar with hydrogel with going to the dentist's office and having work done. They're putting it in your mouth. Polytech also sells hydrogel that we use quite a bit at school. And so she was putting the hydrogel in a container and then taking a mold of her mouth and pouring the plastic into that. So these little mask forms. She was interested in Art Nouveau, and so she was creating She was interested in this relationship that she had with her grandmother, and her grandmother passed away, and then she was given these rings, and she has this picture of her grandmother holding her like this, and both the rings are on, so these are meant to be worn right here. And then there's text, I think a letter from her and her grandma, and their silhouettes, so it was a really lovely piece. It was very sentimental. Ashley likes to also deal with her relationship with her mother, and so this is the plastic, actually cast hollow. So it takes a while. I was really impressed with her trying to figure this out. It just takes a while to set up, but you can also hollow it yourself. And so she does a lot with her mother. Used to make all these recordings for her, and then she would have to sit and listen to her mother talk to her. And so she was taking I mean, like, how terrible. So she was taking all of these like recordings and like taking the audio tapes and then crocheting them into other forms. I'm her mother right now with my hands, my man hands in there. She was interested in the tribe that stretches their neck. We think they stretch their neck, but they're actually pushing their collarbones down. And so she was interested in making a form that would make her head sit in a certain way. The tips are cast, everything else is fabricated. They're cast in resin with makeup as the coloring. You can also color resin with chalk too, as well, to get that color. So there she is.
Makes you hold.
And then this, she was actually, she tore apart a computer circuit board and then started taking molds of the circuit information. And then, so this was really interesting because she had to cast the ring, and then she had, from the ring, made a mold and then made the plastic pieces. And these are all spring-loaded, so. And the other one, this is crop type, the other one says WTF and, you know, all that. So, how we don't communicate anymore. This is Barry. He's from Indonesia, so he was talking about that distance between him and his family, and he was doing that through architecture. So you can see a traditional American architecture, or Western architecture, and then an Indonesian architecture, and these are rings. So he took a cast of this little family. So that's his family in Indonesia, and then he's on the other side. So you can see that they're using it in moments. Everybody at some point in the semester is experiencing this technique. This is Jess, and she carved this kind of like nasty ear wax form that sticks right into her ear. We took a mold with skin wax. We poured the skin wax in her ear and took a mold, and then she modified it. And then we took a mold of that, and then she started pouring wax into it. And the hair, the pink is actually, she had a mohawk before this, so that's what that is. So these all just snap into her.
In your class.
So this was a mold that failed, and this goes back to sometimes things you can't take a mold of them, or they just don't work. And so we took a mold of these big jacks, and she did a fabulous job of making this mold. You could hardly see the parting line. And then we poured it in from the top. You know how a jack has the point, so we poured it in from the top, and then it kept trapping air. So they're only getting half circles. But it was consistent, it looked good, and so I'm like, just go with it. She was obsessing over it so bad, but she went with it, and it turned out great. She drilled into it, and those are metal jump rings. The plastic is really not very brittle. I mean, it can handle having the plastic jump rings between it. But no matter what we did, we tried to drill holes into the rubber, but it's like self-healing. We tried to cut it out. Nothing worked to get that air not trapped, but when she poured wax into it, it worked. It was just that the plastic was setting up so quickly, and then the wax just has time to be in the mold, and she got perfect wax jacks. So, I mean, and if she poured resin in there, she'd probably get perfect resin ones too. It was just the time that it took. So the mold actually didn't fail. It was the material that we were casting into it. I always say we a lot because I'm sorry. I feel like sometimes, you know, well, you're so much a part of their life. So I hate this blue ribbon. I wish it was black, but that's just me. So here she's doing chasing and repoussé. She was casting these little fish that she got in Japan. One's metal, but you could even paint this, and originally she had painted them to look more like koi, and it was just so distracting that she had to sandblast it all off and then seal it with an acrylic to get that shine back. She was interested in cameos, and so the plastic, the window's plastic, the birds are plastic, so you can look at yourself as you're looking at the female. She's using colored pencils as well. He was interested in Napoleon and all of the kind of fanfare of being a general and the badges and things like that. But this is all paper. So this is pulp. The frame is pulp, and then he gold leafed it. And then the back's beautiful as filigree with etchings of a map. And so I think it looks a lot like the Beatles. There's something about kind of poppy. And the nickel was so polished that you could see yourself in it as well. Well, I already showed you that, sorry. This one was produced this semester. It's one of those squishy lights, you know, keychains. So she took a mold of it, and she really wanted it the color to, you know, transition. And then again, they had to cast something in metal. So this was really quite nice. And the metal one hung down the back, so it kept it all, it was like kind of like a counterweight. She did a really nice job with the mold. I mean, you can see the parting line, but I think also there's something charming about that. Like, I am not distracted by that at all. I think it is what it is. The brooch on the top, she had all these buttons from her grandmother that she didn't want to destroy. But you know, I cast out plastic constantly, but she didn't want to destroy them, so molds were made. This was about her relationship with her and her boyfriend with the skin wax. He can set his hand on top of hers. I never knew that your hand made a heart. I'm still like blown away by that when you go like that. So you can see the ring on her finger, and the skin wax is picking up absolutely everything. So. And this is her and her husband about shared relationships, and that's the cast of the palm of their hands. So. This is Suk Young, one of my students, became a good friend of mine. That's all hand pierced, and the whole cage closes over, and it's worn here, so that it's kind of, you know, somebody can put their arm around you and put your hand here. So. That's a fishing worm rubber, but it's more of a conceptual piece. It's not really meant to be worn. This is a chatelaine. I always feel like I pronounce wrong, but so basically women at one point didn't have pockets, and so they carried everything on the outside that was important to them, and they're kind of the keepers of the house. And so this is a contemporary version of that. So she made everything from the beading, she sewed the purse, she made the snaps, she made everything here. The part that's cast is the top of the laxative container, but it's like a little Playboy bunny. Those are silicone breast implants, but they're meant to go in your bra. They don't go in. So it's a whole little kind of contemporary. And then when she photographed it, one of the girls in the class drew I hate to say this, but a tramp stamp on the back. So it's pretty cool. Lindsay, this is electroformed and all glass, real teeth. They're the same amount of teeth that we have. And so sometimes though she had to take molds of the teeth in order to get the amount that she needed. So, but it was really nice. These had little scopes that you could look through and inspect the teeth more closely. So, what we went over today is making a 2-part mold or a 1-part mold. Making a 1-part mold, I would basically be done with what I just did here, okay? I'm done. I don't need the marbles. I could just pour whatever material in. And then we're using silicone rubber, 7430 polyurethane rubber. Easy Flow 60 plastic, and I showed you, I just didn't have time to go over the pulp, but it's pretty interesting. This is an example of the cottles at the bottom, minus the pour spout, what your 1-part looks like initially, and then this is what the 2-part looks like after, you know, you're ready to pour then over top of it. Here's what I was saying. So basically, the wax or the plastic will be poured down the battery, go along like this, and then start to fill the space up like that. So we're looking at it the wrong way. We should be looking at it the other way. If you're thinking about pouring the material into it after the mold is made. But the battery is like your main sprue system. This is an example of the sprue. There's really no sprue system or pour spout. It's the hole on the back of those. So these are really flat forms, and it's inconspicuous. You know, it's easy to clean up. It would be the back of something. This is my contact information, zettle-sr@gbsu.edu. And if you're interested in seeing my work, you can go on my website. I do incorporate a lot of these things into my own work as well as fabrication and as sewing, mixed media. So And I didn't give this to the last people, but if anybody wants one of my cards, I have those, well, not business cards, but I have this too. You can also get it at the, you know how the awesome table where you can grab everything at Snag, those will be there too. So anyway, yeah, anybody have any questions? We have a couple more minutes. I'll bake under the lights one more time.
You
So.
said you don't, like, students don't have centrifuges, and do you do steam casting or pressure casting?
We do centrifugal casting and vacuum casting, and that's it.
What about gravity?
We do gravity casting, yeah, and we also have a very large foundry in sculpture, so we do ceramic shell, and it's really nice because the way the studio is set, there's a flow between metals and sculpture, and so if we get too big, then they're always happy to let us cast. Because I'm not a jeweler by trade. I mean, I'm not a metalsmith either. I mean, I come with a sculpture background, so I'm always encouraging them to just break out of this size, you know, and think a little bit bigger. So, yeah. Any other questions? Nope. Okay. So I made it. With time to spare, I actually made it faster this time. So thank you. So that was like crazy.